The fastest way to make someone think about you is to stop responding. Not with anger, not with drama, just absence, silence. The unanswered message that sits there, glowing, doing nothing, and somehow doing everything. This isn't romantic wisdom. It isn't a dating trick. It's a psychological vulnerability most people don't realize they have until it's already working on them. Because when someone ignores you, something strange happens. You don't lose interest. You don't detach. You lean in. Your thoughts circle tighter. Your emotions grow louder. The person who gives you the least suddenly occupies the most space in your mind. And the uncomfortable truth is this: the attachment you feel isn't about them. It's about what your mind does when certainty disappears. In real life, this plays out quietly. A text that used to come instantly now takes hours. Someone who once seemed engaged becomes vague, distracted, just out of reach. Nothing explicitly ends. Nothing is explained. And yet, internally, something starts to tighten. You check your phone more often. You replay past conversations. You search for meaning in tone, timing, punctuation. It feels like desire. It feels like longing. But psychologically, it's something colder and more mechanical. The human brain is not designed to handle unresolved patterns. It craves closure the way the body craves oxygen. When a social connection becomes unpredictable, the brain doesn't relax. It mobilizes. What you're experiencing is not attraction increasing. It's uncertainty hijacking attention. To understand why this works so powerfully, you have to understand how the brain learns to want things in the first place. We like to believe desire is driven by pleasure. It isn't. It's driven by anticipation. More specifically, by the space between expectation and reward. Psychologists have known this for decades. The strongest behavioral conditioning doesn't come from consistent rewards. It comes from intermittent ones. Rewards that appear just often enough to keep you engaged, but not often enough to make you feel secure. This is the same principle that makes slot machines addictive. You don't pull the lever because you're winning. You pull it because you might. The uncertainty keeps your brain alert, scanning, predicting. Dopamine isn't released when you get the reward. It spikes when you don't know if you will. When someone starts ignoring you, they unknowingly, or sometimes deliberately, place themselves inside this reward system. Every reply becomes a potential win. Every silence becomes a loss you feel compelled to recover from. Your mind begins treating their attention like a scarce resource, and scarcity changes value. Something that was once ordinary becomes important simply because it's no longer guaranteed. You don't want them more because they're better. You want them more because your brain hates unfinished loops. This is where popular narratives get it wrong. People say, "We want what we can't have." That sounds poetic, but it misses the point. What we actually want is what we almost had, and then lost without explanation. The attachment doesn't form at the beginning. It forms at the disruption. When someone gives you consistent attention, your nervous system settles. It knows what to expect. There's no mystery to solve. But when that pattern breaks, your brain flags it as a problem. Something has changed. Something needs to be figured out. And here's the part most people don't like to admit. Your mind assumes the problem is you. Silence invites interpretation, and the human mind is exceptionally skilled at filling gaps with self-blame. Did I say something wrong? Did I miss a signal? Did I matter less than I thought? Each unanswered question pulls your attention further inward. This creates a subtle but powerful shift. The relationship stops being about connection and starts being about self-evaluation. Their absence becomes a mirror, and you stare into it, searching for flaws. Ironically, the more someone ignores you, the more mentally present they become. Not because they're doing anything, but because your brain is working overtime in their absence. This is also why closure feels so relieving, even when the answer hurts. A rejection ends the loop. It gives the mind a shape it can close. Being ignored doesn't. It leaves the story unfinished, and unfinished stories are sticky. There's another layer to this that's even less comfortable. Being ignored doesn't just activate desire, it activates status anxiety. Humans are deeply social creatures, wired to monitor where they stand in the social hierarchy. Attention is not just affection, it's information. When someone withholds it, your brain reads that as a potential drop in rank. Am I less important? Less interesting? Less chosen? And because social rejection once meant real danger in our evolutionary past, the brain treats it seriously. Your nervous system becomes alert. Your thoughts narrow. You focus on regaining connection not because it feels good, but because disconnection feels threatening. This is why ignoring someone can feel powerful. It creates a symmetry. One person becomes the evaluator. The other becomes the seeker. But here's where it gets darker. Over time, the brain can confuse anxiety for attachment. The emotional intensity created by uncertainty begins to feel meaningful, deep, significant. You mistake activation for connection. This is why some people find themselves obsessing over someone they don't even particularly like. Someone who doesn't treat them well, who offers little warmth, little clarity. The bond isn't built on shared values or intimacy. It's built on emotional friction. The mind learns, slowly and quietly, that this person controls relief. And once that association forms, detachment becomes difficult. Not because you love them, but because your nervous system has linked them to resolution. This mechanism doesn't only apply to romantic relationships. It shows up in friendships, family dynamics, workplaces, even online interactions. Anywhere attention can be given and withdrawn, attachment can be engineered. Social media understands this instinctively. Notifications appear unpredictably. Validation arrives irregularly. You refresh, not because you're enjoying yourself, but because you're waiting. And waiting is the hook. The most unsettling part is that none of this requires intention. Someone doesn't have to be manipulative to trigger it. They just have to be inconsistent. Your brain does the rest. What begins as a simple change in behavior becomes an internal interrogation. You think you're trying to understand them. In reality, you're trying to regulate yourself. And the longer the silence stretches, the more meaning you assign to the smallest signals. A delayed reply feels loaded. A brief message feels symbolic. Neutral behavior starts to feel personal. At some point, the relationship exists more vividly in your head than it ever did in real life. And that's when the question quietly shifts from, "Why are they ignoring me?" to something far more revealing. What part of me is so desperate to be answered that their silence feels unbearable enough to reorganize my attention, my emotions, and my sense of self around someone who hasn't actually done anything at all, except disappear just enough to make me wait? That question is where most people stop looking, because if you follow it honestly, it doesn't lead back to the other person. It leads inward, to a mechanism that's uncomfortable to watch in real time. When someone ignores you and your attachment intensifies, what's really happening is that your sense of agency is shrinking. Your emotional state becomes reactive. You're no longer choosing how much they matter. You're responding to how much they withhold. Psychologically, this is a loss of control disguised as desire. The mind prefers explanations that preserve dignity, so it reframes the experience as attraction, chemistry, connection. Those stories feel better than admitting, "My attention has been captured against my will." But notice the pattern closely. The moments you feel most drawn to them are not moments of closeness. They're moments of doubt, of waiting, of imbalance. You're not bonding through shared experience. You're bonding through unresolved tension. This is why the attachment often collapses the moment the person becomes consistently available again. When the uncertainty disappears, so does the intensity. The loop closes. The nervous system stands down. And suddenly, without the friction, the feeling feels thinner than you expected. People often misinterpret this as losing the spark, when in reality, they've lost the stimulus that was keeping their mind activated. There's a quiet cruelty in how cleanly this mechanism works, because once your brain learns that a specific person controls relief, the relief of being acknowledged, validated, or chosen, it begins to prioritize them automatically. Not rationally, not consciously, neurologically. This is where attachment slips into something closer to dependency. Your mood starts tracking their behavior. Your self-image starts bending around their responses. You feel calmer when they engage, restless when they don't. And without ever deciding to, you've handed them emotional leverage. What makes this particularly dangerous is that the system rewards self-abandonment. The more you monitor them, the more invested you feel. The more invested you feel, the harder it becomes to step back. The brain interprets effort as value. If I'm spending this much energy, it reasons, it must be important. This is the sunk cost effect, operating on your emotions. And once you're inside that loop, clarity becomes difficult. Because the attachment doesn't feel like weakness. It feels like depth, like caring, like something meaningful is at stake. But meaning built on instability is fragile by design. There's also an identity component that rarely gets discussed. Being ignored subtly threatens how you see yourself. It introduces ambiguity into your social worth. And the human mind is remarkably intolerant of ambiguous self-image. So you seek confirmation, not just that they care, but that you matter. This is why being ignored by someone you never valued can still hurt. It's not about losing them. It's about losing certainty about where you stand. In that sense, the person becomes interchangeable. What you're really attached to is the unresolved question they now represent. Am I chosen? Am I enough? Did I misjudge my place? And as long as those questions remain open, your attention stays locked. The unsettling implication is this: attachment isn't always about love or compatibility. Sometimes it's about ego regulation, about stabilizing a shaken sense of self. Which means that when someone ignores you and you feel yourself getting pulled toward them, the pull isn't romantic, it's corrective. Your mind is trying to restore equilibrium. The problem is that it's doing so externally, instead of regulating internally through self-trust, boundaries, or acceptance. The mind looks outward for resolution. It waits for the other person to fix the discomfort they triggered. And waiting feels passive, but psychologically, it's exhausting. This dynamic shows up repeatedly in unhealthy relationships. One person controls access, the other controls effort. Over time, effort intensifies while access shrinks, and the imbalance begins to feel normal. What's rarely acknowledged is how seductive this imbalance can be. It creates drama without conflict, intensity without intimacy, movement without progress. You feel emotionally busy, occupied, engaged, but you're not actually building anything. The mind confuses stimulation for substance, and once you see this clearly, it becomes hard to unsee how often society relies on the same mechanism. Brands withhold availability, platforms ration validation, institutions delay responses. Power is exercised not through force, but through controlled absence. The one who can afford to be silent holds the upper hand, which raises an uncomfortable possibility. When someone ignoring you makes you more attached, it may be because on some level, you've been trained to associate deprivation with value. That's not a personal failure. It's a learned pattern. Many people grow up in environments where attention was inconsistent, approval conditional, affection unpredictable. The nervous system adapts. It learns to stay alert, to monitor, to earn. Later, when someone recreates that pattern, it feels familiar, even magnetic, not safe, but recognizable. And familiarity can be mistaken for chemistry. The danger isn't just emotional pain, it's miscalibration. You start orienting your life around signals that don't deserve that level of importance. You invest in people who offer ambiguity instead of clarity, tension instead of trust. And because the attachment feels intense, you assume it must be meaningful. But intensity is not evidence of depth. Often, it's evidence of instability. The real question, then, isn't how to stop getting attached when someone ignores you. That frames the issue as a reaction problem. The deeper question is why silence has so much power over you in the first place. What does it activate? What does it threaten? What unresolved loop does it reopen? Because once you understand that, something subtle changes. The silence doesn't disappear, but its meaning does. It stops feeling like a message about your worth and starts looking more like what it actually is. A blank space your mind rushed to fill. And maybe the most unsettling realization is this: the person you thought you were chasing may have never been the source of the attachment at all. They were just the trigger. The real force pulling you forward was your own discomfort with unanswered questions, with unchosen moments, with not being able to tell yourself a clean story about where you stand. Which leaves you with one final, quietly disturbing thought to sit with. If someone can make you feel deeply attached simply by withholding themselves, how much of what you've called desire in your life was actually your mind reacting to absence? And how many of your strongest feelings were never about connection, but about not knowing how to let something remain unfinished?